Are there any, moving on to any other business that we want to talk about before we close out the school budget? Yes.
I still want to come back to the one thing that just bugs the heck out of me, and I speak to the board here. We sat and went through a long process last year and approved items, disapproved items, etc. But we wound up approving, putting in some things, and Scott, Isabel put together a list of those things that they pulled forward out of the money they should be spending this year rather than turning money over to taxpayers. Whether the school board is legally empowered to do that, whether the school administration is legally empowered to do that, I think it's a reprehensible practice, particularly since we approved these items for expenditure to be expended in this year's budget. And I would respectfully request that hopefully we will never see this again. I don't know who agrees with me on this board or whether they want to even go public and say how they feel, but I think that's a terrible thing to do. I recognize that there's always unexpected expenditures that do pop up. There's processes, means, ways, including special meetings to deal with them. And I just thought that was terrible. I hope I never see it here, and I hope I never see it with the town again.
Now, Scott, you had something to defend those actions or not?
I don't know if it's a statement defending, it's just a...
Yeah. Well,
I'll just present
counter those actions.
Very briefly on why the administration asked the board for them. Really, there's a couple of areas that unanticipated costs that came up really from the state after the budget process was completed. And this was part of the presentation that the administration made to the school board. It wasn't until after the March meeting that the legislature came forward and said that they were going to reduce and eliminate the state's portion of their contribution to New Hampshire retirement. So at the time, we didn't realize that the state was going to pass on 4.8% of the teacher's salary costs that they normally contribute to New Hampshire retirement to the district. So that was, at the time, that was an unanticipated expense that we didn't budget for, of $387,000. Also, and I'm not going to get into the big detail about it, but the legislature also chose not to fund the vocational centers at the level they had done previously. So what happens with that is less of the state funding goes to the Hewitt Center. So the Hewitt Center has less revenue come in, so they have to pass it on to local districts. That was another, at the time, we anticipated $248,000 of additional costs that we had to budget for. So what we came forward, and then the other thing was, a shortfall is we anticipated about a hit of about $15,000 to $37,000 in the jump in the cost of oil. But just on the state pieces alone that the legislature actually didn't even define until July of this year was those two cost shifts from the state's burden onto the local. So we had a couple of choices. One is to say, okay, we have money available at the end of the year that we normally turn back to offset the possibility of having to come forward with a deficit appropriation because we're short over $500,000. We'd like to expend that money this year so that we have money available in the current year. But the school board did approve that, and what they've said is, and what we'd like you to do is the money that was appropriated this year for the tractor and for the Z-turn mower, not to spend it this year, to turn that back.
And that's all because of the added expense of those.
And the added expense really was from the legislature doing the cost shifting, and some of the discussion didn't start in earnest even until after March. So it wasn't even, some of it wasn't even on the radar. So that, and again, you can agree with it or disagree with it. Some people come forward and said, okay, come forward with the deficit appropriation. You know, ask for another public meeting and start over again, and you can argue either way. The administration recommended to take it out of that year, so it didn't impact this year and not have to come forward with a deficit appropriation. So again, it's two sides to it, but that was behind the administrator's recommendation and the board's final approval.
But still, the process is in place for you folks to have come to the taxpayers of Guilford to say, look, here are unanticipated costs, legitimate costs, but they're still unanticipated. But there was a process in place to take care of that, and the board decided not to follow through with that. They just decided, we'll do it, we'll spend that money anyways, correct?
just because for the reasons I stated.
Well, I will agree with Dave that I think it was a poor choice.
I don't buy into the theory of asking forgiveness. We're big boys, we're a big town, and I think the town has always given what is absolutely needed to both the school and to the town, and to manipulate or play games or any way you want to construe it, I think it's a bad practice.
I'd like to hear from somebody from the board on this. Not just Scott.
Yeah, she is not here tonight, sorry.
No? So Alan, you're on the board.
I am, but the chair speaks for the board.
That's the chair's responsibility.
Well, it's not going to,
It's not going to change things.
Not gonna
I just
change
want to make
things.
sure
It's just
that
getting
that
them
was on
aired,
record.
so it's
as part of
important.
this meeting, I totally disagree with the practice.
so what you're recommending, you two are recommending would be to have a special meeting and go ask for some more money.
The laws, the processes, the RSAs, all support that. Money is supposed to roll back over to the town, unexpected monies. And then if these things did occur, then money can be asked for again. And I suspect that all these things being legitimate, I don't think anyone's questioned the legitimacy of the items.
Right.
I think what the question is the practice of how it was done.
Yeah, especially on items that were already approved for this year.
That's what-
It doesn't, it's one thing for the state to say, well, we're changing stuff in the middle of the year. Okay, sort of. But like in the terms of the tractor, no.
That means you have some extra money next year.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Paul Blanford, as
Yeah.
the vice chair of the school board, I'm certainly, after discussing with the other school board members, Mr. Weber, that's the board's practice that the chairman is the spokesman for the board. But as Mr. Weber can't be here this evening, I believe he might be patrolling up at Gunstock. Certainly I can answer whatever questions or whatever concerns may be on the budget committee.
Yeah, you'd heard the question.
I did. And of course, I think from the board's perspective, our feeling was we had some unanticipated money. We still turned back a great deal of money. It's not as if we frivolously spent all the unanticipated money. I don't have the exact number. I want to say it was $600,000 that we did turn back to the taxpayers. We took the approach of saying, what is the best way to alleviate the potential problem that came to us after the budget had been resolved? I don't believe it was a cloak and dagger, as some people have suggested. It was out in the open, it was a public hearing, it was public discussion. We took the approach from the board's perspective that we felt was the best way to anticipate. I'd also like to reiterate what Scott said. If that money is not needed for any shortfall, it will be returned back to the taxpayers. That was the thing that was discussed at the board level. We will take this out as a safety valve. We'll take this out as insurance, essentially. But if the state does come through with the funding as they normally do, or if the state does not reduce the shortfall, then we will return that money back to the taxpayer. I can guarantee you that. I was one of the people that spoke on that, saying my concern is I don't want this money to get lost. We want to keep it as an insurance policy so that if the state does not fund what they've funded over the years in their reduction post our budget approval, then that money will go back to the taxpayer.
Kevin?
Paul, I wasn't part of this body and I didn't participate in the budget last year, so you have to forgive me. As far as like the tractor, I think it was $35K and the zero turn was somewhere around 10. But, I mean, did that go through the normal, I know it got approved for this coming school year, or was it this coming school year? Did that go through the process? I mean, was there a separate line item for that? Was that lumped in, or was it a warrant, or?
I believe that was in the budget,
That was in the budget.
and I believe it was in the equipment line. And Scott, you can help me with that to make sure that I don't speak correctly.
Yeah, and one thing just touched on that, and we didn't just arbitrarily pick things that met a number, on the Z-turn mower was an item that Tim brought forward to the administration for a number of years, and actually, when we went to turn it over for a new one, we had a number of people look at it and it just was falling apart to the point that it wasn't useful. Also on the tractor, we were getting into the mowing season, and Tim had about $2,000 to $3,000 worth of repairs just to keep it going. So we chose that. One thing we didn't want to do is put $2,000 to $3,000 in repairs. We had a lot of front-end problems with it, just to then sell it in June. So I just want to point out that, to answer your question, yes, there were line items in the budget.
I know, but were they specifically for that? Because
Yes.
I seen a line item for replacement equipment that.
They were,
Next year's
they were
budget, yeah.
spelled out in the budget.
Okay, yeah, well, I was looking
But if you look at
at
the
prior year. That's in here as well.
Yeah, and we had a long discussion about
Yeah,
it.
And there was, you know, a few $1,000s, and I'm thinking, you know, that's a line item to replace, you know, unanticipated vacuum cleaners, weed whackers, a few $100 items. And
Yeah, we
I'm concerned that we added $35,000, bought a tractor out of that, which I'm not against the tractor, I'm not against the Z-turn if you need it. But, I mean, that may have not been the right place to purchase it out of.
Yeah, and again, we can have a discussion on whether that was right or not. The rationale behind it was broken. We had to put more money in to fix it just to get us through 3 months. So we thought that was a legitimate or better choice on not putting $3,000 to the machine and get rid of it in 3 months. So purchase it now, it offsets the deficit for what we had talked about, and we didn't waste $3,000 for 2 months of service. So again, that's how we get to the decision on what we would buy ahead of time. And again, the board was very clear in the commitment, and if you don't, if the shortfalls don't come, you gotta make sure you give it back to them.
Okay, I think this was a point of principle from what I've seen here, and we made that point.
And I would also like to comment, I was at that board meeting when the presentation of a list of buying some items was made. And it wasn't highlighted that these were being pulled forward out of a particular budget year to be spent on last year's budget. It was just a list made. I know I went home that evening after that meeting and pulled out the budget, looked at it, and that's when I raised the red flag that sent out some questions and wanted to know what's going on here. Granted, there was opportunity to speak at the meeting. They always give the opportunity. However, as I say, it was not highlighted, whether it's cloak or dagger or not, it was listed, but it was not highlighted that it was being pulled forward out of another budget.
Okay, yes, Sue?
As I'm looking at the salary list here, I see the team leaders' stipends for the grade school and the middle school are listed here with the attending benefits, but I see that there are no names next to the team leader positions. There are names next to the team leaders in the high school. I presume these are not filled. And I think we had some sort of a discussion a couple of years ago where the team leaders were, I believe, eliminated, yet I see $41,800 here for those still open, and I wonder why that is.
Yes.
Whatever the position is that we know that person is going to be, or expect the person to be in it that following year, is reported that way. Team leaders can, and the enrollments, the grade assignments can shift each year, each summer at the elementary school. So at the time that we present this now, we don't have necessarily someone assigned or contractually obligated to that position. That
But,
would change for
but there will be someone there, is what you're
We're
saying.
planning on expending those funds for that purpose.
I think last year those were not expended, were they?
Team leaders?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the grade school and the middle school?
Yeah.
Why is it not reflected now when we got these pages?
What page are you looking at?
Well, I'm looking at page T1 on the list here.
Right, because we're looking at next year, and we don't know who's going to be, necessarily who will be in those roles next year. We had a teacher move from the middle school to
And
the elementary.
those are filled for this current year.
They're filled for
Is
this
that
current year, correct. But the figures here are for, we're budgeting next year. And the people who are in those roles this year have no obligation to be in them next year.
I'm on the, if I'm looking at this right, it's a flat rate, I think it's 2,500.
Yes, sir.
Right.
So it doesn't matter how many years of service or what
Correct.
degree level, so it's gonna be that.
Yes.
It's not, okay.
Okay, so we understand. I think he answered your question. Any other questions?
Croc TV.